It's game on in Washington as an outgoing president fights to defend his legacy achievement from being dismantled by the new guy in town. President Obama met with congressional Democrats today to strategize a way to save Obamacare from being repealed and replaced by the Trump administration, which is exactly why Vice President-elect Mike Pence gathered with the Republican legislators, calling health care reform their first priority.
Obamacare has failed, and it has been rejected by the American people. But now it's the time for us to keep our promises. Step one will be to repeal Obamacare. We're working on a strategy in concert with the leadership of the House and the Senate for both a legislative and executive action agenda to ensure that an orderly and smooth transition to a market-based health care reform system is achieved.
That's a complex proposition, made even more so when you consider the Affordable Care Act is now the way that about 20 million Americans get health insurance who didn't have it before. Democrats responded quickly.
Republicans will soon learn that you can't keep the good parts of the ACA and remove the rest of the law and still have it work.
Here in Massachusetts, universal coverage will still exist as it did before Obamacare, but there are concerns about a possible cut in federal funds that help pay for it, which would put even more pressure on a tight state budget. Today at the State House, Governor Baker said keeping all citizens covered will still be a top priority.
What I can say is that people in Massachusetts need to know and understand that there's been a deep and long and bipartisan commitment to universal coverage here in the Commonwealth, and that's not going to go away.
It's a complicated situation with both political and policy issues in play here. Joining me to help sort them out are Renee Landers. Renee's a law professor at Suffolk University. Good to see you. Josh Archambault is Senior Fellow on Healthcare Policy at the Pioneer Institute. Josh, good to see you again. And Don Berwick, Dr. Don Berwick, is a Senior Fellow at the Institute for Health Improvement and a former administrator for Medicare and Medicaid services. I got it in the right order for once. I did. In that capacity, he was responsible for the early phase of the Obamacare rollout. Good to see you, too. Don, is this a case, Josh, of be careful of what you wish for? It's a lot easier to be for repeal when you don't have the power to do it. Now the Republicans do. Are they going to be caught in a tough position here?
Well, I think we're starting to see the details flushed out, and I think they're making a political calculation that you don't put all your cards on the table right away. They need to get 60 votes ultimately in the Senate in an ideal world to pass and replace it in a couple years. So we'll just see this play out. It won't be one big bill. It's going to be piecemeal. They'll lead with repeal, and then they'll start to have
But they only need 51 votes to gut some of the key provisions,
Correct.
Which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. Is Obamacare on life support, Don Berwick, or is repeal easier said than done?
Obamacare is working. It's had a lot of benefit to the public, and repeal, just plain repeal, without a sensible replacement, is a disaster. That's the problem they've brought here now. We're looking at tens of millions of people losing coverage, the unwinding of a lot of the private insurance market, and devastation to Medicaid. A lot of people stand to lose.
Should Democrats have seen any of this coming? Is there anything that could have been done by the likes of you and the Obama administration to have inoculated this, to insulate this from some of the attacks that are going on, or no?
On the whole, I think things went pretty well. I think maybe Obamacare, the Affordable Care, it's a complicated law. And I think if we could do it again and really help the American people see a little more about exactly what they're getting from it, it would help.
If you did it again, wouldn't you also have done it maybe a little less perfectly and gotten at least a Republican vote or two, so it wasn't 100% Democrats?
It was far from a perfect law. Everybody knows that, but they did their best. The Republicans were the discipline, the party discipline against this bill was really phenomenal during its early rollout.
Renee, you know, it's not unusual to deny people rights. You know this far better than I in your career. Can you think of a case where people have been granted certain rights, like essentially a right to health care coverage in this country, where it's been taken away? I couldn't think of one. Is there one?
No, I can't think of anything sort of right off the top of my head, but I do want to follow up on something that Don said, which is that I do think that there was a failure to really try to persuade the American public about what the benefits of the law were that they were experiencing, because even now, you know, the people who've benefited from the Medicaid expansion or the fact that their children can stay on their health insurance until age 26 don't understand that those are benefits that come from the Affordable Care Act.
But Donald Trump does. Things like a ban on keeping people off because of pre-existing conditions. He said that's going to stay. He says you'll be able to keep your kids up until 26. He doesn't talk about how you fund it. But he does say those things will stick.
Right, but those things cannot stay and provide effective coverage to people without keeping some of the funding mechanisms and without keeping everybody in the insurance pool.
Why don't you turn to Josh and say, can they? I mean, how do you do this?
Yeah, with all
they like all the good stuff.
With
they
all
want to keep 20 million covered.
I think this discussion perfectly illustrates one element of what happened in the election.
What's that?
That it was, we didn't message it properly. That's not the only issue here. We have people who thought they were going to get a $2,500 reduction in their premiums, who see no end in sight, who are not on the exchange, who do not have subsidies, that are hurting. And so I think even to say that we have a right to coverage, not true. 30 million people remain uninsured in this country. And just having a health insurance card, as we know in this state, is not guaranteed access to care. So for us to say coverage equates with a right to health care, simply not true. Unintended consequences come with it, and we have to be realistic.
Well, let's get back to my question, at least the one broached by Renee, is how do you keep the good stuff, which is essentially what Donald Trump and some of the Republican leaders in Congress have said, and they've also suggested we're not going to dump 20 million people, either out of humanitarian reasons or because they live in their districts. How do you do that and repeal this individual mandate? And by the way, with all due respect, you're wrong before. You only need 51 votes, a so-called reconciliation, to remove the penalties for not buying health insurance, which essentially guts the whole law. How do you reconcile this?
Well, I think, look, there's a strategy playing out here. You're going to repeal and hold people harmless for at least 2 years while you get to replace. The question that we have to ask as a country is, are the health needs of New Mexico the same as Massachusetts? And they're not. And
so what does that mean? Let individual states do what they want?
So no, I think it at least means that you have to allow for a much broader flexibility. And I'll just say that this is not a show where we're going to get deep in the policy weeds, but there were proven state solutions to get people coverage guaranteed. Maine and Idaho had reinsurance programs that were not high-risk pools to get at some of these issues that we simply do not hear debates in.
You're shaking your head back and forth when he's talking.
He's ignoring the number of people that have benefited from this law. There are millions and millions who are about to lose something bad if repeal occurs. And this step-by-step approach, it means there is no replace plan. There's none. And signaling repeal at this stage without replacement is going to result in the unwinding of the exchanges, millions of people thrown off coverage. They're going to attack Medicaid directly, making some of the most vulnerable people in this country be put at risk. There is state-by-state variation, thank goodness. Some states have done beautifully with the exchanges. California has made their exchange work beautifully. Alaska, with a Republican legislature, has basically fixed a lot of the premium problems of the exchanges. This is all fixable without throwing that law out.
You know, one of the ironies for me is you worked at the Heritage Foundation when you were younger, right? I mean, earlier in your career. It was the Heritage Foundation that came up with this concept of the individual mandate to begin with. No freeloaders, wasn't it?
Well, the Heritage Foundation, again, I'm not spokesman for them.
I know, but the answer is yes.
I think they would say that they had a vision that was very different for what an exchange looks like, which would mean that the coverage would be basic. It would be catastrophic. If you get hit with a bus,
but they supported the individual mandate. That is correct.
I think they understood that you have to be able to work with individuals to get them insured, particularly young individuals.
Renee, Barack Obama today in this extraordinary meeting with Democrats said, don't help them craft a replacement. He's the same guy who said elections have consequences. Well, the consequences are Obamacare is at risk. Why shouldn't Democrats, even though it doesn't make them happy, work for the best possible outcome, even if it's not the Affordable Care Act?
Because I do not believe that the Republicans, despite their protestations to the contrary, have any intention of providing a replacement that provides meaningful coverage or the possibility of access to care. I think that
so just say no is the best strategy.
I do think just say no is the best strategy, and that was what the problem was with getting any Republican votes the first time. They were not interested in having a practical solution to this problem.
What's this mean for Massachusetts? I know we have universal coverage. Obviously, it predated Mitt Romney. We all know this story, and Romney Care, and then there wasn't Romney Care when he's running for president. We don't have to go through that whole story. But the implication is what? That the funding issue, which Charlie Baker says will hold harmless, but there are budgetary issues here, too.
There is. Yeah, there's a lot of risk for Massachusetts here, especially without a replacement on the table. We don't know what it looks like. Our current ability to cover people completely depends on a waiver. Our Medicare waiver, Medicaid
which was granted right before the election, which could be repealed.
Absolutely could be repealed. It's in the waiver itself that the administration can take it away with the stroke of a pen.
And federal subsidies, obviously, are
billions of dollars, literally over time, could leave this state in federal subsidies.
Do you agree quickly that there could be really negative consequences for Massachusetts?
From a financial standpoint, it will force a conversation about how we cover people, and I think it's long overdue.
Do you mind ending on Nostradamus? You're sitting here, all three of you, a year from now. What's the state of this law? quickly if you can.
I think that there will be that there will be an effective, a repeal, but without any real possibility of proposals for effective replacement.
So bad news.
Yeah,
Josh?
but right, yes, I do.
How about you?
It's repealed, and the Republicans spend 2 years articulating what their replace plan is and starting to pass pieces of it.
Do people lose their insurance in the meantime?
No, I don't think so. I think they're
They
going to
continue
start.
to cover
I
it.
think they're going to start to talk about transitions and what that looks like in the exchanges, what that looks in Medicaid, and deliver health care in a sustainable way, which we are currently not on that path.
Dr. Verwick, end it.
I hope there are 3 sensible Republican senators who are going to say no, not now. Repeal without replacement is irresponsible. They're going to serve the public instead of just rhetoric. If they break this law, they'll be held to pay. There'll be millions of Americans angry, and they should be.
Renee, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Josh,
Thank you.
thanks so much. Don, you as well.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
Appreciate your time. Thanks so much.